on, you bastard!
Brought to you by supporters who probably have better taste than this schmuck.
It's hard to imagine nowadays, but for a while there, fans were kinda lacking in options for a modern G1 Bumblebee. When Siege hit the scene and Legends fell into the corporate cancellation abyss, we just didn't get one. Then when we finally had a chance to, it was a store exclusive that was scalped to hell and back. And shit. Kingdom gave us one in a box set, but said box set was entirely diverted to us Aussies for some reason, leaving none for the rest of the world. I'd apologize, but I'm not really sure how it happened. Buzzworthy also gave us an option that was also hard to come by everywhere outside of Australia, and also the disc, which you couldn't get in Australia. Also, as amazing as that figure was, I don't particularly think it was what fans were looking for. It was very weird. How hard was it to just release a normal G1 styles Bumblebee at retail in plentiful stock levels? Well, as it turns out, with a little bit of release f***ery, not very. I've touched on the A-level assortment before. A release strategy to keep an Optimus Prime and a Bumblebee perpetually in stock for the full year at retailers who don't usually know how Transformers stock worked. Now, did it work? Well, it did for the first year, but then those same low-level retailers realized little SD's mummy wouldn't actually know the difference if they chose to stock high-profit margin authentics instead, and now these basically just serve the same purpose as normal deluxes, at least here in Australia. Can't speak for Americans, but the entire point is a bit moot when the stores it's aimed at have all but gotten rid of Transformers entirely, because why stock those when you can instead carry 3D printed dragons? How are these not labeled as choking hazards? Nevertheless, we did get some pretty good toys from it. Some awful ones too, but hey, if it gave us some good options of Bumblebee, what's the harm, eh? So with two contenders for the definitive Generation 1 Bumblebee out there, I've wanted to compare the two for quite a while. It's just a bit difficult when you're inundated with the biggest project you've ever worked on, but hey, we're in the clear now, and that means we've got a slot open. Greetings, Cybertronians, I'm DrLockdown, and welcome back to another Versus Review. Me dead, it's been a long time since we did one of these. Today, we're comparing the two hottest contenders, not you, Mr. Lukewarm Porridge, in the deluxe class Bumblebee lineup. Literally, what did I just say? Are you G1? No? Well, f*** off, shit-assatron. Pitting the two G1 heavy hitters together, it's an all-out battle between Studio Series 8629 Deluxe Class Bumblebee and Studio Series Gamer Edition Devastation Bumblebee. It's time to paint the town yellow with a swarm of...
Hang on just 1 second, what are you stealing from?
Huh? What the f*** are you talking about?
I literally just did this video, like a month ago. A bit suspect if you ask me.
Oh, I had this idea before you made it. I just didn't have time to work on it.
Sure. Can't wait to see you on the H-Bomber Guy channel. Nothing. I'm watching you.
Well, that wasn't ominous at all. Totally. Now, looking at these two, you'd think it would be pretty damn clear-cut. Whenever I see comparisons, it's always in robot mode and always talking about proportions versus dynamicism. This one's G1, this one poses better, and so on and so forth. But with the way I usually approach reviewing, we quickly run into the most under-examined aspects, the vehicles. I mean, I care about them, but for a lot of collectors, it's a moot point because of the standard A stance on a shelf argument. That's never been me, though. Now, for an outsider looking in, this seems pretty cut and dry. And if I'm being honest, it still kind of is. But the context behind why each one is the way it is still quite interesting. You wouldn't think it these days, but out of these two, the 86 version is actually the release that drew the most ire. Nowadays, you might look at it and wonder why, but it all makes sense when you consider what came before. For years and years, the only mainline G1 Bumblebees in the Unification style, ignoring the Origins version, were one's derivative of the Earthrise Cliffjumper mold. As mentioned before, we only really had access to versions that did this. From here, you essentially got two main stances related to this mold family. Those who loved the realism and didn't mind the parts forming, and those who felt the parts forming ruined the experience entirely. I was, and still am, very much in the latter category. And that's the group Hasbro chose to target when they brought this little lad into the world. The idea was just to make a Bumblebee that doesn't parts form. And, well, since they weren't going for the Volkswagen license this time, why not try something a little different? Why not go for a more tune-accurate proportional style in the same vein as the Masterpiece 2.0 from a few years back, only not aggressively awful. Well, I can think of one reason why. The other group. After seeing how they essentially threw realism out the window, this crowd was livid. Yes, for all the clown car clowning the Devastation version got, it pales in comparison to the seething vitriol Mr. Buggy was stuck with. Now, to a point, I get it. It's often difficult to separate personal preference from designer intent. It's still a skill I'm trying to internalize to this day, often to varying degrees of success. Even so, I can kinda empathize with the design team. A-Level is specifically designed to be released en masse around the world constantly, over the course of a 365-day period. If you throw a Volkswagen license into the mix, because there ain't no way they can fudge it like they did with Cliffjumper, that massively cuts into production costs. And the whole point is to get as many of these out as physically possible, so avoiding a realistic vehicle kinda makes sense. And shattered expectations aside, this is a very nice vehicle mode. It's very compact and adorable for a deluxe, in a gorgeous dual shade and a wonderful back-heavy balance. Design-wise, it's definitely one you can slice down the middle, where the bottom half is going nice and close to the on-screen model, and the top half goes for a more angular approach. Perhaps it was so that the Cliffjumper retool would work better a few years later, maybe it was to fit the head into the torso, or more likely it was because they had to change something to get the Herbie folk off their backs. If the latter's the case, it definitely makes sense to do it this way, because the front half is very much what people think when they imagine this alternate mode. It's simplified, but it leans into that simplicity very well. The implied hood over the top is lovely, as is that crisp charcoal bumper. You get some lovely silver on both the headlights and the wheels. This is a design where they so easily could have skimped on the paint, and I'm so glad they didn't. Same with the way the wheels are pinned, a factor that's sort of a coin flip whether they bother to these days. I guess it depends on how much budget is left over, and this is a fairly simple and small deluxe, all things considered. But still, great to see. Now, there are a few sections here that are a bit panel-y, and that may tick some people off, but I've never personally found much issue with stuff like that. At least not unless it gets really bad. I also quite like that they went with charcoal windows. Another thing that annoys certain folk because it should have apparently been this abomination instead, but personally I find it gives a better air of realism to the whole thing. Well, at least as realistic as a super deformed penny racer-alike can feel. The bare plastic and paint matches quite well, at least grey-wise. The choice to use this shade was likely more budgetary than realistic, but hey, it works better for me. I dig it. They even managed to go hard on the back, with extra red on the taillights, not seen anywhere else on either mode. So often this section goes ignored, so seeing this here is a real treat. Now, beyond those paint details, there's not really a lot this figure goes crazy with. Most of the interest comes from a mishmash of both the paint and sculpt together. Really, the only subtle additions you get are these sculpted door handles. Beyond that, what you see is what you get, and that definitely did exacerbate a lot of criticisms this poor bug had. You're not going to find all of the crazy hidden sculpting you would on, say, a Masterpiece version. There's no subtle curvature on the roof, no additional lights on the wheel arches. The bumper is straightened out and cartoonified, and they've even added 2 rear view mirrors instead of the singular one the real car has. This isn't the Beetle, it's a cartoonified Beetle, and it leans into that cartoonification and consequently turns up the simplicity. And I think it does that well. It's a recreation of the Toon model that does so incredibly effectively, which, knowing the track record of SS86, isn't always the case. Hell, just look how slapdash some of their more recent outings are. Not saying comparisons make this thing better, just saying this thing is simple but effective. Of course, it's not without flaw. There are a few areas where, even taking into account the budget, I reckon they could have pushed the envelope a little bit. Firstly, the color correction. While, as I said before, the charcoal matches perfectly, the yellow most certainly does not. I don't mind the shaping of this, inaccurate or no, but even with what they were trying to do, they didn't really succeed with how many coats they applied. Now, to an extent, I get it. I have said this way too many times before, but I'll say it again. Yellow is the hardest color to get right, followed by red, and when you put it over a darker color, well, you get this. And given how much of a shade change they've got in there, it could be way worse. But it still is a flaw, and it is still noticeable. Still, at least they mostly fixed it on the bumper redeco we'd get a year later. Still not perfect, but a significant step up. Secondly, the back section is all too quick to come loose. You've got a smorgasbord of tabs holding it together, but nothing seems to latch on very well. Big shame. Thirdly, the arms. They hold, and there's a nice locking point for them in the elbow, but part of me wishes they had a solid tabbing point on the chassis of the rest of the car. As it stands, it's like they copied the conversion of the Netflix version, added a hinge to the backpack, then didn't figure out what to do with these. Of course, this complaint is really inconsequential along with the final nitpick. Weapon storage stinks. It's just just on the back there, when there's a nice cavity in the trunk that could have really done well here. Again, inconsequential, but something I feel I have to mention. Studio Series 86 Bumblebee's not Volkswagen Beetle mode is solid. It's the kind of alt mode that knows exactly what it wants to be, and it does so with aplomb, just inside its comfort zone. If you're looking for something that'll wow you and take you places you've never been before, this isn't going to do that. It sets out to be a well-built, decently sculpted, well-painted Sambo approximation of the car it was based on, and it does that very nicely. Though, if you want something crazy and out there are certainly Bumblebees that'll give you that. There are certainly vehicle modes that push the envelope and deliver an experience unlike any other. And I'm not sure the Devastation version does that. This looks quite silly. Bad? No. But definitely silly. It's sort of like if a kid drew the Classics alternate mode from memory, or perhaps that same kid grew up, got out of Transformers, got really drunk, and then tried to draw it from memory. And believe it or not, there's a reason for this. A good reason? Sort of. See, when Devastation released back in 2015, not every design was explicitly based on the G1 cartoon. Some figures such as Megatron, Menasor, and Devastator were based on figure counterparts instead, of course taking from the recently released Combiner Wars for inspiration. And this is where Bumblebee fits into. Kinda. Not really, depending on how you look at it. Bumblebee is unique because while he does draw inspiration from figures, that inspiration is a lot older than the rest of the cast. Likely due to factors of 1, the team not wanting to f with Volkswagen's ridiculous licensing fees and regulations, and 2, there not being a Bumblebee to draw inspiration from in the Generations line since 2006? Yes, there was the Legends one, and I guess Goldfire from Thrilling 30, but they didn't really fit the Devastation aesthetic. So instead, they turned to the classic. Quite literally. For many, this was still the main G1 Bumblebee for a then modern collection, so taking inspiration just seemed like a no-brainer. Thing is, Classics was big, chunky, and pushing the hatchback aesthetic quite a lot, and the game model, while slimmed out, still went most of the way. The new Devastation toy, don't do that. It almost looks like something you'd see out of a Sanrio or a Disney collaboration, because there are some jank approximations. The front is simply sculpted but very well painted, once again being quite minimalist, squeezing all of that budget out thanks to the A-level factor. It can't really rely on a huge amount of shades, but it doesn't have to. The double silver grills and grey highlights do wonders. I actually kind of like the top is no nonsense. It means that the main focus point pops a lot more. The grey hubcaps are also a nice cartoony touch. Despite the design being further away from the original show, this element feels just a bit closer. Also pins once again, so both of these roll excellently. It might be shocking to some people, but I really like the window shade they've chosen. It's a deeper and slightly richer blue, and the cell shading really helps bring it to life, especially when compared to the previous A-level outing. Though, to be fair, they already experimented plenty successfully with the More Than Meets the Eye collection box set, so they were primed and ready for this. It's actually kind of funny, these two provide great alternatives to the bane of my existence that is Sunbow Baby Blue. Just make the blue deeper, or make it black. It's that easy. You don't have to swap it out for clear plastic, just use better shades. The back is where it starts to get a bit messy though. I love that both of the back windows, the taillights, and the rear bumper are all painted and done so extremely well. That's some crisp as blue, love to see it. But it's a bit hard to make anything out when you've got hinges galore, not just on the back, but also the sides too. And those are just blatantly arms. You can absolutely imagine it as a giant rocket booster, but looking at the original model, that obviously wasn't the intent. This is kibble. Understandable kibble, and not really that big of a deal for me, but it is kibble. And that's all on top of the fact that the back is incredibly squished while the front is super stretched. It's basically as if someone took the front section in Photoshop and scaled it up to fit the leg conversion. It is a very lovely transformation, and I think it was ultimately worth it, but it does have its downsides. This is a weird car mode, definitely not a bad one, and it does some genuinely lovely things, but I can see why folks would be turned off. If you're a vehicle accuracy buff, this is not the alternate mode for you. In fairness, I don't think either of these releases would be in that case, but this one even less so. I get why they did what they did, and given everything it does later, I even applaud it, but as much as I really like this, yeah, it's got some jank in the trank. Also, QC-wise, mileage may vary. This is one of those cases where there's a few instances in the wild where the Autobot badge is misaligned. Mine's unfortunately one of those cases. It's not the worst instance I've come across, but it is there, and this is the only place I figured I could bring it up. Probably won't be an issue once those classic-style toy hacks enter the fray, though. One thing I will give it credit for, though, is that they actually put a lot of effort into how the weapons work. The side weapons are but the top actually works really well as his vehicle weapon. Yes, this is is accurate. It's daft, but it's exactly the way it should be. This is the kind of accuracy I don't mind. The extra little features that recreate those fun, silly moments. Not the obsessive levels that ruin how fun a toy is just for the sake of recreating what was on screen. Not everything translates well from screen to physical form, but the weapon integration, I'd happily say it does. I really like this car mode, faults and all. It's got that rough and tumble feel that well and truly fits into the frantic Devastation combat style. With that said, for the vehicles, there's a clear winner here. While Devastation is more ambitious, 86 just gets what it's trying to do more. Ironically, that came with much more pushback, mostly because of what people wanted it to be compared to what it actually is. Nevertheless, out of the two, it's a more solid vehicle. However, that head start doesn't actually last for long. Sure, some releases do get too ambitious and fumble next to much safer bets, but this isn't the case here. This is a case where the priorities are just completely different, and when you finally bring things to their element, well, the balance of power shifts quite drastically. The engineering here is very much two different ends of the spectrum. You've got one thing that knows what it wants to be and just works, and one thing that really pushes the envelope. One is exactly what people would expect from a G1 Bumblebee with a few little tweaks here and there. And the other one is like, okay, we've got a new design, we can really go nuts on it and figure this out. And that's not to say the quality on either. Either one of these could win, although I kind of already know which one I prefer. But yeah, 86 Bumblebee is still pretty good. You want to remove the backpack like so. It's very loose, as I've said before. You start to bring the legs out like that, and one thing I find really cool is that this entire assembly folds inside out. So that second Autobot symbol actually completely disappears, which I think is a damn cool feature, and of course you fold up the knees. I do kind of wish there was a flip here for the Autobot symbol, but you know, deluxe and not a lot of budget there. By and large, this one is very similar to the Masterpiece Conversion in a lot of ways. One area where I do feel it lacks a little bit is the wheels don't fold in. Instead, you bring out these little strut pieces here, and these bigger strut pieces here, then these fold together, and then these clip onto there. So basically you kind of have to mush them together, and then that creates a nice landing point so that the wheel doesn't stick out. And I get it, it works, but I kind of would have loved the wheel to just fold into the actual cavity there. There's so much unused space here, and the wheel could have just folded away. I don't know, I feel they could have engineered that in personally. Them being Shogo Hasui, because he's the one who did this. You rotate the arms out like that, they're sort of locked in place at a 90-degree angle. Separate them. That will allow you to start bringing these down. Again, it is very similar to the MP21 transformation system. Also, just make sure that's all the way forward, because otherwise it'll be a little bit annoying. These will fold into the back there and sit nice and snugly, with the arms going down like that. The chest folds up and the head comes out a little bit. As you start to bring it up, you'll notice the head's not actually moving. You just need to give it a bit of extra movement there. It'll lock in place on the octagonal hinge nice and solidly, and you close up the chest, and you are done. So yes, once again, building on the foundation of the Earthrise version, which itself was building on the foundation of MP21, but proving you really didn't need parts forming the whole time. It just wasn't necessary. I don't know why people insisted there was no other way to do it. I mean, the proof is in the pudding. The reason this guy doesn't have an accurate vehicle mode isn't because of there's no parts forming, it's just because that's what they were going for. Now, conversely, Devastation Bumblebee is much bolder, crazier, with some really cool panel usage. And yes, that does lead to the panels of the back, but given how cool this is, I do ultimately think it's worth it. First thing you want to do is untab these from the side and start to bring the arms down like so. This section rotates up, and you can start moving that out of the way. This untabs from the foot assembly, and we might as well start to get the feet out of the way. There is a double hinge in the back of the legs. It untabs there, and these fold up. Might look like it's hollow now, but the panels will actually cover that later. And you want to make sure that they actually lock in place there. You can make him a bit taller by not having them locked in properly, but this way it just ensures that it's nice and solid, so that you're getting that rotation instead of the other rotation, and so that it's flush and kind of proportioned properly. Anyway, you separate the legs. Nice little touch is that these panels actually shift onto the shins themselves instead of just being on the feet, which is what the Classics version did. And it's a really cool feature and a really cool way to hide all of that robot junk. Then the feet transform basically the way you'd expect, with a nice hinge there, and you actually get the wheels folding in and pegging into place face on the bottom there, so yes, SS86 absolutely could have done it. These have way more crazy conversions, and they were still able to achieve it, but anyway, you just fold the panels at the back there, and that's golden. Come around to the arms and separate them and start to move them forward, just so we got a bit of clearance. This section will rotate down, however, you'll notice that for some bizarre reason, the head is getting stuck in there. That is because I have deliberately lined it up a different way to what they ask you to, and I will get into why later. I know a bunch of people in the comments are going to say, oh, you mistransformed it, you're a insert slur here. And no, this is deliberate, much like the last time, it's to avoid damage to the figure itself. Seems like an unfortunate theme, but anyway, what you want to kind of do if you use the mistransformation method I use is just push the head forward just a little bit, and then once that's pushed in, that should go all the way down without causing issues with the face, which I will get to. Once that's sort of down, you can start moving the arms out of the way. That will allow you to orient the torso up and the chest the rest of the way, the head panel all the way forward like that, the arms on the sides there, these things clipping into the back there, and then clipping into the backpack. These can fall off. This whole assembly can kind of fall off during transformation, just because the clearance is a little bit small, but it's not hateful. And then you can fold this in if you prefer, or leave it out depending on how you want to use the articulation. Anywho, you bring the arms down to the bottom like so, and then the fists fold out and click. And last but not least, you sort of separate the face from this panel here, and you move the head all the way back so it's sitting nice and flush with the shoulders. And we are done. Just a crazy conversion with lots of really cool ideas. I especially love the way the legs come together. And the torso's got some really inventive things as well. I just like that overall it's not another G1 Bumblebee. It's its own beast entirely. It's its own really creative conversion. So is it any wonder why I think that Devastation wins this category? I mean, 86 is good, don't get me wrong, but there are elements that they probably could have pushed a little bit further. Like, this was supposed to be the quintessential G1 Bumblebee, the main one, the one that everyone was going to have in their collection. And there's just a few little elements, especially in the legs, that feel like they could have gone a little bit further. Whereas this, although not everything lands exactly where it does land, it lands really, really well. You can tell they left nothing on the table with Devastation B. They just pushed it to its absolute limits. Now, that doesn't always work. Some conversions do bite off more than they can chew, but I don't think this is one of those instances. I know not everyone loves this conversion. I know that some people even despise it with a passion and just have thrown this in the bin right after. Not hyperbole, literally they have thrown it in the bin instead of selling it off. I don't know why you do that. But if you're like me, who enjoys fun factor in figures above all else, especially with inventive conversions, this is an absolute must-have. Now, if this channel was like most G1-centric ones, this matchup would be a no-brainer. 86 is more accurate to the cartoon, has a more cohesive backpack, so done deal. F anything that isn't G1. And that does seem to be a lot of the discourse surrounding the new release. He's seen as the inferior little brother in many a discussion board across the interwebs. But I'm not that kind of reviewer. Sure, these are both G1 adjacent, but they both take the design in their own unique ways. And as such, I think comparing them is valid, and the outcome might surprise you. Or not if you're a long-time viewer. Veteran watchers, though, have probably guessed by now how this matchup is going to go. Of course, that's not to say 86 is a bad figure. Again, this is a nice robot mode, and something that had been a long time coming too. Parts forming concerns and exclusivity aside, there were some obvious aesthetic oddities. I never fully understood why the torso was so weirdly proportioned. Well, I did, it was the retool budget and the licensing issues, but like, people insisted this was the best Bumblebee on the market. Period. Better than the Masterpiece even. Both of them. Well, the second one wasn't exactly hard to beat, but still. For years, I and many collectors had been craving an actually good deluxe class unification styled Bumblebee, and this is finally that. And beyond that, he's actually good, not just adequate, hell, not just actually good, really good. I don't care if that last sentence sounded like the cadence of AI slop. I don't care if plagiarism software has ruined the it's not just X, it's Y phrasing. You, this is a damn good figure. Head sculpt is nice and chunky, a bit squarer and wider than the Toon, sort of a light version of what we got with the Origin release. Still feels wrong calling it Origin instead of Origins. I always appreciate when they make this nice and crisp. It's always been the case where Bumblebee looks better the further away from Toon bloat he gets. The Toon was never supposed to be smoothed out, and this is a design that benefits from that. It also perfectly works with the torso below, which has been more squared out compared to the original design. Though that mostly makes sense given they wanted wanted to get the overall shape without pissing off Volkswagen. Now, unfortunately, in doing so, as well as needing to fit the head in the cavity, this thing is significantly chunkier than any previous version of Bumblebee. I know a lot of folks don't like the way this turned out, and I do think shoving the head into the backpack would have been a better solution. I don't think parts forming could have been, though. I know a lot of folks insist that, but nah, sacrifices like this make a lot more sense than pieces literally detaching and reattaching themselves, and not even in a clever and unique way. I don't hate parts forming, I just dislike when it's an excuse for random body parts when they could have engineered it in properly. If parts forming is the entire point, or if it's a weapon that does something really cool, that's okay. Cliff Jumper was a backpack that could have easily been on a hinge. Come on. Arms are decent, a bit faded as they're made out of a different unpaintable plastic when compared to everything else, but still nice. The cut is a bit weird by virtue of having to fold up specifically, and they're a bit small when compared to everything else, but they're still serviceable. The legs are quite simple, but get a lot done. The feet lean wonderfully into the almost Beetle aesthetic, showing the angling and bumpers proud and true. I still reckon the wheels should have folded in instead of that weird strut effect they've got going, but I guess it sorta makes sense when the whole thing basically folds inside out with the hinge. Speaking of, they've actually gone to the trouble of color matching when the hinge meets the rest of the foot, making the legs seem fully integrated. Absolutely something they did not have to do, but a lovely touch nonetheless. And the one sore point, the one part folks insisted would ruin the design if the parts forming was taken away is fine. The backpack is quite manageable. It's not accurate, sure, but neither was the original, and I'd argue it's no better or worse than that mold. And hey, it's a backpack, honestly, who cares? Who's gonna display their figures in this configuration? Of course, that's not to say this figure is without flaw. There's two main ones that actively bug me. Well, three, but one of them is purely a me thing. The QC Gremlin finally got to me, and the paint at the top is misaligned, and I didn't notice until I was writing this review, so I basically have no chance to return and swap it out. Not like it would have helped much, because this toy was really hard to get on account of being a heavily requested G1 frontliner and being a target of a shit ton of theft. So glad they stopped doing open packaging. I get the environmental factors, but this was too much. But no, the main two issues are both in relation to the articulation. Unfortunately, due to the way this transforms, the ankle tilt is really unnatural. Regardless of how this guy poses, he just always looks weird from the knees down. They put a lot of effort into this, but I'm not sure it paid off. This is actually an element the Earthrise mold did significantly better. It was angled far more effectively, and led to a much more natural stance overall. But the clunkiness unfortunately goes a bit further than just the ankles. The articulation is honestly pretty good. You've got all the joints you could ask for, even inclusive of a wrist swivel. Part of me wishes there was a solid locking point for the foot pivot, but that allows the transformation joint to provide just a little bit of downward motion, which I know will be a nice touch for some collectors. And yes, the shoulders are ball joints instead of swivels, by virtue of it being a Studio Series release, not a standard trilogy unification era, but come on. It's not exactly something to get that angry over. Yes, swivels are better, but ball joints are fine. What's less fine is how the joints don't seem to accomplish much. Thanks to the weird positioning of the feet combined with the slightly bigger chest and smaller arms, no matter how you pose him, he never looks dynamic. He always looks stiff and clunky, and yes, some people will say, well, that's always been the design, but the previous outing never had this issue, and neither did the classics well before that. Transformers fans are blessed in the sense we usually have really good articulation in comparison to other toy lines. Part of it's because they're robots and they can sculpt around the points instead of forcing themselves to keep everything exactly like the character they're trying to represent. But part of it is also the lack of licensing issues, meaning that by and large, every spare cent goes into the figure itself, provided the corporate bigwigs don't skim an exorbitant amount off the top. But articulation can only go so far. You still have to actually sculpt things properly to make use of that articulation. As it stands, Bumblebee feels like he's awkwardly working around his posing. And yes, the reasoning does stem from sacrifices that are leagues better than what Earthrise did, but they are still handled in a way that stops this figure from achieving greatness. SS86 Bumblebee is a perfect example of why I hold sculpt and presence so high. He has all the joints you could reasonably want, but because of where everything is cut and because of how he positions himself proportions-wise, it doesn't particularly come across well. It's not bad by any stretch of the imagination, and some would even argue that as a G1 character, he doesn't need to pose particularly well. I definitely don't agree with that assumption, but it's one people have made. 86B poses fine and is sculpted adequately. but something about the interplay of those two factors, while far from figure damning, makes him a bit of a clunkster. He is ultimately a figure that shines in a standard pose, not really engaging much with the dynamicism he can potentially have. Not even his gun helps. It's very well sculpted and painted, but it doesn't do anything to really bring this figure to the highest levels. To be fair, this gun is kinda tedious at this point. It's basically shown up over and over and over again, so at this point it's okay, I guess. It's weird too, this is a Hasui design, and those are usually famous for really flourishing in how their sculpt elevates the articulation. Hasui is a master of things being simple but effective, so not seeing it here, it doesn't particularly make much sense. I think at the end of the day, I'm more into what SS86 Bumblebee represents than what he actually is. Like, he's a good toy, but he's not the most amazing thing ever. If you're the kind who puts everything on a shelf in a static pose, this probably is the best option. If you're the sort of collector who likes to mess around with your figures, he's a decent desk toy, just not an amazing one. But if you're primarily photography based, there's definitely releases that'll do you a lot better. For instance, God damn, what a glow up! Devastation basically shows how it's done, with the proportions really helping the dynamicism. It's not exactly a one-to-one of the screen model, there are parts that stick out a bit, but by and large this is a delightful robot mode. The torso is a lot better proportion this time, not exactly accurate to the Devastation model, as that was a lot closer to the classics jacketed look, but he gets the idea across very well. And I think with how the other proportions have been tweaked a bit to work in plastic form, it actually works a bit better here. If nothing else, it gives him his own style instead of just being another G1 Bumblebee. Not to say there's anything wrong with that, but we already got that. This doesn't need to tread exactly the same ground, even if it serves the same market purpose. You do get a bit of scaffolding around the neck area, as well as the top of the backpack, but it's pretty ignorable on a deluxe this small. I didn't think I was going to hate this way more when I initially saw photos, but in person, it's fine. Same with the neck. A lot of stock photography and early reviews showed it shoved really far forward, but it's perfectly capable of moving backwards. Not sure why it was presented as such, this just looks way better and seems intentional too. A lot of folks have gotten angry at the backpack, and again, I just don't see it. Yeah, it sticks out a bit, but this doesn't particularly seem like the kind of thing to bring out crazy ass for, and I'd argue it keeps a lot more to itself than the 86 one, which sat way further down. You can even open up the back panel to offer more rotation at the waist, which is something they didn't need to do, but I'm so glad they did. In fact, the posing overall works really well, not just because of the joints, but because the proportions really lean into it. Like, take the arms, the subtle angling outwards with the contrast between forearms and shoulders. The yellow puts an emphasis on the end of the arm, on where the motion happens. Sadly, he does lack a wrist swivel, but it's honestly all worth it thanks to how well realized the arms turned out. The legs are nice and chunky, much closer to the classics version, just with the panels on the shins instead of the feet. Surprisingly, this is the element of the design that turns off most G1ers, and I get where they're coming from, but I can't agree. This design just makes him feel way more proportional, especially compared to how thin the 86 ones were. 86's legs weren't bad, and my main issues are purely with those ankles. But Devastation definitely wins this, and they even managed to incorporate a wheel fold to tuck into the incredibly well-proportioned shoes. It's basically got the stylings down pat, whilst completely re-engineering them to look less chunky. It's some damn good dedication, and way better than how they half-assed poor old Optimus. Initially, I lamented it was disappointing that we didn't know who designed this, because this just oozes creativity and zaniness, and I would have loved to link that with other figures from the same designer. But funny thing, I actually ended up reaching out to Evan while I was writing this, and not only was he himself responsible, but he also attributed it to Tomoki Tatsumi. And yeah, given his involvement with the two non-combiner SS86 commanders, as well as some rather wacky and out there releases I've covered previously, yeah, this absolutely tracks. You've got to give this guy more original conversion projects, because when he's not held to copying something that we got previously, he really shines. Well, that and not being forced to conform to the limitations of a mold that wasn't designed for what he was given. I wouldn't envy anyone tasked with making Legacy Quake work. Honestly, for the most part, I'd say everything here just works better than the 86 version, with one exception. The head sadly isn't as good, it's just a little too soft and all over the place. And the grey paint is applied a bit too thickly and washes out a lot of the etching. It's giving buzzworthy core class, though not quite as bad. Make no mistake, this fundamentally fundamentally isn't a bad head sculpt. It's still incredibly swish and stylish, it's just that 86 happens to do it better. And honestly, I don't think this is the kind of design that can be ruined by a weird head sculpt. It already has so much going for it that it would take a real stinker to drive it into the ground, and this certainly isn't that. And everything comes together to form a delightfully well-realized robot design. It's G1, but through a modernized lens. It's funny that the only reason we got to this point was thanks to several layers of reinterpretation, but hey, it leads to a fantastic robot mode. Although not exactly like the Classics version, because that was never the intent, it ironically gives me the same feeling that Classics did when I first engaged with it. It's fresh, unique, but still understanding of what made the original design work so well. And unlike 86, it actually makes use of its posing. Without any of those weird proportional oddities, is able to engage much more effectively with the articulation. With the better arms and properly ankled feet, he leans into each joint he has. This Bumblebee easily styles on any other deluxe version that came before him. As someone whose bread and butter comes from photography, or at least a good portion of it, this is the shit I live for. Devastation Bumblebee feels full of movement in any pose. The motion curves can practically be felt from every edge and angle. I realize that's kind of what the video game was known for, but let's be real, it hasn't had the best track record in terms of representation. Still, if this is the result of it taking this long to nail it, I think it was all worth it in the end. There's not a lot I can really fault with him, it's pretty much just two issues. One, the accessories. The larger cannon is fine, if a bit daft. Kinda cool to see the same color reused from the lights and hubcaps, and the only thing I can really criticize is the lack of a blast effect snub. But otherwise, it's fine. But the standard pistols, god are they hollow. To a point, I get it. This guy has a pretty high parts count for an A-level figure. You can tell they're pushing this thing to the absolute limit. They haven't even added any additional paint on the main body, letting the vehicle mode flourishes do everything for them. And it's cool to have these dual wielded, it really ties into the expressive posing. And y'all should know how I feel about dual guns, they be badass as f***. But like, was it really that much of a cost to have these filled in? Makes me wonder what the other options on the table were if this is what they settled on. Compared to how much they put into the last two, what the hell are the designers stuck with right now? I really hope they aren't being overworked for the sake of a couple of extra million in the pockets of shareholders. Secondly, and a bit more concerningly, there's the issue of the face paint. Kinda. Well, it's more so what happens to it. If you take a look under the torso section, you'll notice this is where Hasbro's put all of their copyright information. That in itself wouldn't be an issue if the face wasn't scraping up against it during the transformation. This has led to many copies becoming chipped after only a few conversions, and given how awesome said conversion is, yeah, it's pretty common. There is a solution, as I've demonstrated in the transformation segment. Just shove the head in the other way around, avoiding the nonsense entirely. Unfortunately, this does mean it can get stuck, which leads to the whole thing of having to use the weapon to unjam it. It's annoying, but hey, pick your poison, I guess. Paint chipping or one annoying step in the conversion. Which do you think is worse? Of course, I'm making sure to actually explain why I used an alternative transformation method this time, because last time I kinda expected folks to fill in the gaps, and instead I just got a whole bunch of people saying I was a f***ing idiot. They didn't use the word idiot, they used something much more slurry, but you get the idea. This time, I'm making it abundantly clear. This is on purpose, and a workaround that ensures the figure doesn't break during conversion. I guess you could try sanding the piece down, which I might try later, but either way, it's an issue, and even though I figured out a workaround, it's still something that needs to be addressed. Even so though, me, this is a good robot mode. It might be a little light on the paint, but it goes hard in pretty much every other category. The fact it's styling on so many standard deluxes, not confined to the A-level specificities, is really insane. This figure simply refused to leave my desk for the past month. I can't take my mitts off him because it's just so fun. And he has the looks to back it up. He's photogenic both where he lines up with the game model and where he chooses not to. But hey, I guess when you give Tatsumi free reign to figure stuff out, he really does deliver with some next level shit. And with that, you can probably tell who wins this round. Not every super complex figure is automatically better than a simple and smooth release, and the same is true for the inverse and opposite. This, however, is very much a case where it actually does succeed in going above and beyond. They so easily could have phoned this in, which is kind of how I felt about the previous year's release with the Transformers 1 version, but they didn't. They gave us a Bumblebee unlike any I've ever experienced, outside of maybe the New Age 2.0 version, at least in terms of complexity. Maybe him being so good is the reason Orion Pax turned out so poorly. Maybe they reallocated a whole bunch of budget to him to make him work. I don't know, just hypothesizing. But does that really matter if we end up with one of the best deluxes of the year? And I really do mean that. I do think this is one of the most engaging modern Hasbro figures I've gotten in a while. The hype is real, and Bumblebee got the moves. This This matchup is a great look into why context matters for certain releases. Neither are bad, both are well worth the purchase if you've been eyeing them. And in fairness, SS86 Bumblebee does have the better vehicle mode. It's basically everything Hashtag could have done with the resources given, and Tatsui knows how to make a nice chunky alternate mode. But at the same time, I do think a few more minutes in the oven would have helped him. His conversion is quite good, but it isn't anything we haven't seen before, outside of the way the extra Autobot symbol folds away. That subtle trick cannot be overlooked, but the end result is still pretty good. This is a figure that excels at just being a Bumblebee, and that carried a lot of favor for me back in 2024. It was a case of finally getting things right, and all it had to be was good, and that's what it is. It was the right figure at the right time, and you can't really fault it for that. But Devastation Bee, he's just something else. The past year of releases has been pretty good, make no mistake, but a lot of the figures have been pretty simple engineering-wise, at least compared to how batshit Legacy got at times. The focus at the moment is very much on the looks rather than the play pattern. The only real exceptions I can think of at the moment are Brawl, Wheelie, Sea Spray, and Nexus Prime. And the last of those, let's face it, turns into nothing. Bumblebee hits the scene with a fun factor that just can't be beaten. I think him and Brawl are my two favorite recent Hasbro transformations, and it's real fucking close on which is better. That's not to say elements such as sculpt and paint aren't as important. And yes, in regards to the vehicle mode, this Bumblebee does falter a little bit, but you can't deny this is one stylish as robot mode. It uses the existing paint to great effect, proportions himself well, and makes fantastic use of his posing. Maybe he's not the figure for you if you're a display-based collector, or if you don't vibe with his conversion, or if you're just going for as pure a G1 collection as physically possible. But if this figure even slightly intrigues you, I cannot recommend this experience enough. At the end of the day, though, I'm just glad we've got options. This is the kind of shit people wanted for years. Remember the re-engineered Classics version with the Volkswagen shell from old third-party days? Did that count as a knockoff? I don't know. Point is, there was once a time where people were desperate, and now we have options. Hell, these aren't the only options you have. There are other releases that offer other pros and cons. These might be the main two, but these aren't the only ones. As if coming back from the brink of parasite spearheaded extinction, it would seem the Bumblebees are finally back in droves. It may have taken a while, but f*** me dead, it was worth it in the end. But as always, fandom public consciousness is a conversation, so drop your thoughts for Bumblebee options below. Do you prefer the more classic approach, or are you looking for something a bit spicier? How would you like to see them approach Bumblebee in the future? Apparently the next Bumblebee we're getting in the A-level lineup is going to be the one from the last night, which... not really feeling it. I think I'll stick with Devastation. That's my fix for the foreseeable future. But until that future becomes the present, as always, remember, there's a context for everything. Till next time.